Coming up next on the Jeff Crilley Show, we'll be talking to the owner of the largest privately held collection of Indian artifacts on the planet. That's next.
Many are predicting that the worst is yet to come, which is unfortunate, said one person here. Until now, they've enjoyed the reputation of being the nation's I Spies.
Watched a burglar in his home this morning by webcam.
As a journalist of over 25 years, stories are what make my world turn.
Reporting live from the Dallas newsroom tonight, Jeff Crilley, Fox 4 News.
But in 2008, I took the jump from my familiar life and started a PR firm from my home.
We're talking about anyone with a camcorder like the one I'm using becomes a television network.
We started slowly growing the company, and we now have over 100 clients, and we've branched into the world of live digital broadcasting. I now own 8 different TV studios and have a huge team, and the stories that I now get to share are sometimes the most important of my life. Life has a funny way of coming around full circle. This is the Jeff Crilley Show.
Well, most of us remember a little bit from grade school on Native American history, some of the battles at Little Bighorn. Some of those things might be familiar to you. We're going to be talking to the man who literally wrote the book on Native American history, Wendell Grangaard. Thank you for coming into the studio.
And thank you for inviting me. I hope that a lot of people can enjoy what we're going to talk about.
Absolutely. Well, we have a display of artifacts on the table, and I have to tell you, this is just a sliver of his collection, and you have millions and millions of dollars of artifacts here. Wendell, why don't you go through and show us what we've got?
I would love to. In the very front one, it belonged to a gentleman by the name of Crazy Horse. He took the rifle from Lieutenant Grumman at the Battle of Fetterman. The next one down is a 66 Yellow Boy, and it was owned by Sitting Bull. Sitting Bull received it as a gift from Red Cloud in 1870 when he was elected the head chief of all the nations. And then the one right below it is a deluxe 73 Winchester that he killed a Crow war chief and took it away from him. Each gun now that was taken in mortal combat is marked, and they have special marks on it. And the Crazy Horse one and the Sitting Bull one both have that same mark, only it's written a little bit differently by each individual. This one right in front of me is Custer's Bulldog, the ivory-handled one. This one was found on the battlefield in his coat. He wore a leather coat that day with fringes, and in each pocket was one of these ivory-handled bulldog revolvers. And they were taken by some Cheyenne gentlemen. Now, and then the far side over here by Jeff is a gun that belonged to Crazy Horse. He took it, he was guarding the Pahasapa, which is the Black Hills. And he had his ghost dancers in there, and he killed a man in French Creek. He was quite taken with that man because they fought with Bowie knives. And because the man was in the creek picking up gold, and he had laid his revolver on the bank. So rather than Crazy Horse shooting him at a distance, which he could have done very easily, he pulled out his knife because he saw that the man had a knife. He honored that man right up until his death, because he told his wife when he died that he was going to see this gentleman who was one of the bravest men he ever killed. And then in the center here is a ceremonial axe that belonged to Sitting Bull. It's one of my favorites of my collection. And on it is the axe itself was made at Fort Token by a blacksmith by the name of McLaughlin. And then on each, on the blade, he has a symbol on there of a heart. And that represents the Strong Heart Society, which Sitting Bull started. Then if you look at the handle of this axe, it's not round like normal. It is shaped in a rectangle, and it represents the 4 directions: north, south, east, and west. And because when Sitting Bull would pray, he would always hold his thumb on the left side, because that was part of his demeanor. And then the buttons at the very top of this axe is a configuration that represents the White Horse Society. They were a very special council who would determine what would be done in certain circumstances of a tribe. The bottom 2 sets of buttons represent the Eater Society. This is a midnight group that they would determine if it was time for the tribe to leave, for one example. Then in the very center, there is a single button. That button represents Sitting Bull's band, which is the ICA, I-C-I-R-A. And then this is what the bottom part here is, what the Native Americans always called a drop. And on the drop then represents certain things. There's 2 sets of horsehair here. The one horsehair was from a horse that when Sitting Bull killed Magpie, he took his big old black stallion, faster than the wind. And so he cut some of the tail hair off of, and attached it to his ceremonial war axe. The gray horse is a horse that Cody gave to Sitting Bull when he was with the Wild West show in 1885. And then the feather on there is a bird. It's what represents what Sitting Bull, when he became a man, when he was about 14 years old, had a vision. And in the vision, he was always to pray to a god who was a deity of Wankatonka. And his name, they called the Thunder Bird. That's what this feather represents. Then as you go to 2 buttons here, the blue button represents Wankatonka. Now, Wankatonka is their god, and he lives in the Black Hills, and that's why they fight so hard to protect the Black Hills, is that this is the home of their god. Then the other red button that is attached to this drop is a button that represents the strength and leadership and so on, which Sitting Bull aspired to all of his life.
Wendell, you are amazing. And to give our audience a little more perspective, we found a nice clip from the History Channel. Let's go ahead and roll that now.
It's one of the most crushing defeats in American history. Custer's last stand. June 25th, 1876. Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer and over 600 troopers of the 7th United States Cavalry arrive in the Little Bighorn Valley of southern Montana. The cavalry has come to subdue a village of defiant Indians. Thousands of Sioux and Cheyenne under the leadership of the great holy man, Sitting Bull. For a century, the United States has pushed the frontier west, herding tribe after tribe onto agencies or reservations. The Sioux and the Cheyenne don't want to give up their land on the northern plains. These last defiant Indians gather into a colossal wandering village. In the spring of 1876, the village arrives on the plains of Montana.
The village was always on the move. They knew the Army was out after them. And to the United States Army, to capture a fleeing village was an impossible task.
Custer follows Sitting Bull's path west across the Wolf Mountains. On the other side, the Indian village stands on the banks of a slender river. The Indians call it the Greasy Grass. The Army calls it the Little Bighorn.
Well, and even that little clip doesn't do it justice. I mean, Wendell, you've lived with the Native Americans for 60 years now.
Yes.
And many of the stories that you acquired over those 60 years, you put in a book. We're going to put the cover of the book on the screen. I want you to talk about it.
Okay. This now is a book that I accumulated stories to recreate the battle. There's been hundreds and hundreds of books that have been written on the subject, but usually the authors were kind of hamstrung because of the fact that when they would get an interpreter to talk to some of the Native Americans of this time, if you ended up with an interpreter that spoke one dialect, and then you were talking to a person that spoke a different dialect, for example, you take the Sioux language, Dakota and Lakota. Both languages are similar, but there are words that are different. And so consequently, when someone tells you something, you write it down. Well, there are so many things that we have not understood and could not put together. Well, I spent enough time with this that I created this book, and I've laid it out. Went to the, when an author writes about, for example, the Medicine Tail Coulee, if you're not a student, you can't understand it. I'm traveling through the Medicine Tail Coulee. Well, it's tough. But if you read my book, I have a map in there. I have the journey that each great war chief made. So as I'm telling the story, you can follow on the map through the battlefield and understand what I'm saying. And so it makes it enjoyable to read and to understand. So it was one of the finest things I think I've have created over the years. I was in the bridge business and built a lot of bridges, but this was a good journey.
This is your legacy. This is what you want to leave the planet. And you and I were talking before the show that even some of the young Native Americans are not aware of some of their own history.
Yeah, that's a sad part, Jeff, because I speak at the reservations at their colleges, and I speak at a history class. And of course, I speak only on this subject from about 1866 to about 1900. But spending that much time with my Native Americans, I knew descendants, very close friends of Sitting Bull, Crazy Horse, Two Moons. So these gentlemen conveyed to me the stories. Well, over time then, I found that the Native Americans themselves were starting to lose their history. And Benjamin Black Elk, who was my greatest instructor, has made me make a promise that I will not let this history die. Chip.
And the history books that we read as kids are written from a certain perspective.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. Yeah, I see, and I've tried to correct in my book the misunderstanding of situations. And I was lucky enough to have known Benjamin Black Elk. Ben had a wife whose name was Ellen. And Ellen was a cousin of Crazy Horse's wife, Blackshaw. And of course, Blackshaw lived till 1926. And she lived right beside Ellen and the Black Elk family at Manderson on the Pine Ridge Reservation. Well, she always liked to reminisce. For example, one time they were cutting up carrots and making a stew. and she cut her finger and the blood was running. So she stood there and talked about how when her husband died at Fort Robinson. That history has never been recorded because it's private. It'll be in my next book, The Life of Crazy Horse.
We only have about a minute left. Why don't you leave the audience with maybe a moral to this story? Why is it important that we preserve this history and know this history?
It's so important because it is such a big part of America. Now, we whites came here and have established a great country, but the society and the civilization that the Native Americans had, which we called the nations, was great. And there are so many things that they don't get credit for. And in what I write in my books, what I record on each one of the weapons, that their history, I'm trying to preserve that, because that was my, when I lost Benjamin Black Elk, I made a promise to him that I would not let this die.
Wow. That's a great way to end this segment. We're going to put up your Facebook page so people can get in touch. It's facebook.com/Guns of History Gun Gallery. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Wendell. This has been a
sure
real blessing.
appreciate being here, and I enjoyed it.
You bet. And that's it for now. We'll see you next time.